The mysterious signal. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, silent and cold, a place where only the most advanced minds dared to listen. Among the countless stars and drifting celestial bodies, a small but crucial station floated in the darkness. Omega 47, one of humanity's deep space listening posts, built to scan the cosmos for any unusual transmissions, signals, or possible signs of life. For years, Omega 47 had been operating in silence, picking up nothing but the usual background radiation of the universe, the whispers of dead stars, and the echoes of collapsing planets. The crew stationed there had long since grown used to boredom, spending their days analyzing waves of static, hoping, just once, to hear something that might change everything. But no one expected that the signal they would intercept that night would be the one that would do exactly that. It started as a faint pulse, just a small fluctuation in the usual noise of space, almost easy to ignore. Technician Elias Carter, sitting at his console, nearly dismissed it as another glitch in the system. But something about it felt different. His fingers hovered over the controls as he stared at the strange anomaly appearing on his screen. It was rhythmic, repeating at precise intervals, not random like the usual cosmic noise. "Hey Davis, come check this out," Elias called out, his voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. Commander Lena Davis, an experienced officer who had spent over a decade monitoring deep space signals, walked over with an uninterested sigh. "Please don't tell me it's another false alarm," she muttered. "Last time, it was just a pulsar." Elias shook his head, adjusting the frequency. "No, this is different. It's not natural. It's structured." The moment Lena leaned in and saw the repeating pattern on the screen, her expression changed. She frowned, adjusting the signal's clarity, filtering out the cosmic interference. The more she fine-tuned it, the clearer it became, a deliberate transmission. The station's artificial intelligence began running decoding protocols, trying to make sense of the strange message. Lines of data scrolled across the screen, numbers and symbols shifting into something recognizable. And then, the translation appeared. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the words formed. "Prepare for annihilation." For a moment, there was only silence. Elias swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he read the message again and again, hoping he was wrong, hoping that there had been a mistake. But the words did not change. Annihilation. Elias whispered, "Is this some kind of warning?" Lena forced herself to stay calm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "We don't know yet, but we need to alert command immediately." She turned toward the main control panel, activating the emergency transmission system. A direct channel to Earth's Defense Command opened, and within seconds, a high-ranking officer appeared on screen. Admiral Jonathan Pierce, a man known for his unshakable composure. "Omega 47, what is the situation?" Pierce's voice was firm, but there was an underlying concern in his eyes. Lena took a deep breath before speaking. "Sir, we've intercepted a transmission. It's artificial. It's intelligent. And..." She hesitated for just a second before forcing out the truth. "It's a threat." She sent the decoded message over to the Admiral's display. He studied it, his expression unreadable, but the slight tightening of his jaw told her everything she needed to know. "This changes everything," Pierce finally said, his voice lower now. "Did you trace the origin?" Elias quickly tapped the controls, pulling up the data. "Yes, sir. The signal came from deep space, beyond our explored regions. But there's more. It's not a single source. It's being broadcasted from multiple locations." Pierce's face darkened. "That means they have an advanced network. They'd want us to hear this. They want us to know they're coming." A heavy silence filled the room. The weight of those words sank deep into everyone's minds. "Sir," Lena finally said, forcing herself to ask the question no one wanted to say out loud, "do we assume this is an act of war?" Pierce exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "We don't assume anything yet, But we don't take chances either. Prepare for immediate analysis. I want all available ships on high alert. If this is real, if this is not a misunderstanding." His voice grew cold. "Then humanity just received its first warning. And we might not get a second." The transmission ended. Lena and Elias stared at each other. The quiet hum of the station's systems was the only sound now. Outside, the endless void of space remained the same as it always had been, silent, dark, vast. But for the first time, that silence felt threatening. Somewhere, out in the unknown, something had sent a message, something intelligent, something powerful. And if the warning was true, then humanity was about to face a war it never saw coming. The darkness of space remained unchanged, vast and endless, but for the crew of Omega 47, everything had shifted. The signal they had intercepted was no longer just a curiosity. It was a declaration, one that could change the course of human history. The words still flashed on the screen, cold and unyielding. "Prepare for annihilation." Lena Davis sat rigid in her chair, staring at the transmission logs as if expecting them to change. They didn't. Elias Carter, still struggling to process what they had discovered, ran a final verification check. The data was undeniable. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was deliberate. "Are we sure this isn't some kind of mistake?" Elias asked, his voice uncertain. "Maybe it's a translation error. Maybe." Lena cut him off with a sharp look. "You saw the signal pattern. You saw the structure. There's no way this is an accident." Elias exhaled, rubbing his temples. The idea of humanity not being alone in the universe was something people had speculated about for centuries. But no one expected first contact to arrive in the form of a threat. The station's warning lights flickered as an urgent message came through from Earth's Defense Command. Admiral Jonathan Pierce reappeared on the screen, his face grim. "We've analyzed the signal," Pierce began, his voice steady but tense. "The transmission is coming from multiple points beyond our known space. It's not a single source. That means coordination. That means intelligence." Lena's grip tightened on the console. "And the message itself, sir." The Admiral's expression darkened. "There's no room for misinterpretation. It's a direct threat. We have to assume the worst." A heavy silence followed. It was one thing to discuss the possibility of hostile alien life. It was something else entirely to face the reality of it. "What are our orders?" Lena finally asked. Pierce didn't hesitate. "We are treating this as a potential act of war. Omega 47 is now a priority surveillance outpost. Your job is to keep tracking the signal, look for patterns, anything that gives us insight into who, or what, we're dealing with. Meanwhile, the fleet is mobilizing. If these beings intend to follow through on their warning, we will not be caught unprepared." Elias felt his stomach twist. The fleet was mobilizing. That meant Earth's leaders had already made up their minds. This was real. Lena nodded, her face unreadable. "Understood, sir. We'll keep monitoring." "Good. And one more thing," Pierce added, his tone lower. "No leaks. The last thing we need is panic. The public doesn't know yet, and until we have more information, it stays that way." The screen went dark. For a long moment, neither Lena nor Elias spoke. The quiet hum of the station's machinery was the only sound. It felt louder than usual. Finally, Elias let out a shaky breath. "Do you think they're already on their way?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the radar display, at the distant stars beyond their small station. "If they are," she said slowly, "then we just heard their war cry." The weight of the situation pressed down on the crew of Omega 47 like an invisible force. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to something they couldn't see, couldn't predict, but knew was coming. The signal was still broadcasting, repeating its ominous message across the void. "Prepare for annihilation." Lena Davis stood at the central console, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. analyzing every frequency shift, every pattern in the transmission. If there was anything hidden beneath the message, coordinates, a deeper meaning, a clue, she had to find it. Elias Carter, still shaken from their conversation with Admiral Pierce, paced the room. "I don't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to Lena. "Why warn us? Why not just attack?" Lena didn't look up. "Maybe they want us to surrender before they even arrive." Elias stopped, considering that possibility. Or maybe it's psychological warfare. Get inside our heads. Make us afraid before the real fight even begins. Lena finally turned to him, her face unreadable. "It's working." A sudden beeping interrupted them. The station's long-range scanners had detected something. Not a star, not an asteroid. Something moving. Elias rushed to his console, his hand shaking slightly as he refined the data. "Lena," he swallowed hard. "We've got incoming objects. Fast. Multiple." Lena's pulse quickened. "How many?" Elias stared at the display as more red dots appeared on the screen. 1, then 2, then 10, then 50. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Too many." Lena snapped into action. "Send the data to command. Now." Elias's hands flew over the keyboard, transmitting everything to Earth's Defense Command. The fleet needed to know what was coming. Before he could finish, the station's lights flickered. The transmission feed stuttered. A chilling realization hit them both at the same time. The signal wasn't just a message, it was a beacon. "They're already here," Lena whispered. The air inside Omega 47 felt heavier, as if the very walls of the station were pressing in on the crew. Lena Davis and Elias Carter sat frozen in front of their consoles, watching as the long-range sensors continued to flood the screen with red blips. Each one represented a moving object, each one an unknown force approaching from deep space. And they were fast. Lena's hands gripped the edge of the console so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She forced herself to stay calm, but the sheer number of incoming signals was overwhelming. 50, 60, 70. The numbers kept rising. The station's systems were struggling to keep up, processing only fragments of data at a time. Elias Carter swallowed hard. "Lena," he said, voice strained, "we're looking at a full-scale fleet." Lena's mind raced. Every instinct in her body told her to do something, anything. But what could a small outpost like Omega 47 possibly do against an armada? She slammed a fist on the console. "We need to get this to command." Elias was already working on it. He pulled up the emergency broadcast system, bypassing all standard communication channels. Every second was critical now. The signal had been a warning. No, a challenge. And now, the challengers had arrived. The station's warning lights blared, casting the small control room in a red glow. The alarm's deep, pulsing hum vibrated through the floor. A second screen lit up with a notification. Long-range transmission jammed. Elias's heart dropped. "They're blocking us." Lena clenched her jaw. Of course they are. She didn't have time to process the fear rising in her chest. The enemy wasn't just approaching. They were already interfering with Omega 47 systems, silencing them before humanity could even call for help. The implications were terrifying. This was a species that understood war. Lena forced herself to think fast. If they're jamming us, that means they're close enough to detect our transmissions. That also means they can hear everything we say. Elias finished for her. They looked at each other. For the first time since discovering the signal, they truly felt the presence of something out there. Something intelligent. Something listening. A sudden beep from the station's radar snapped their attention back to the screen. The first wave of ships had entered visual range. The grainy display flickered as the station's telescopic cameras struggled to capture an image. The moment the first ship became clear, Lena felt her breath hitch. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't like any human design. The alien vessel was massive, jagged, and alive with shifting metal plates, almost like it was growing. A dark, eerie glow pulsed along its length, as if the ship itself had a heartbeat. Elias whispered, "What the hell are we looking at?" Lena didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing. This was not a scouting party. This was a battle group. The radar flared again. More ships, different shapes, different sizes. Some small and fast-moving, others colossal, like floating fortresses. "This isn't a first contact," Lena murmured. "This is an invasion." Elias's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "We have to find a way to send this data back, even if it's just partial. We can't let Earth get caught off guard." Lena knew he was right. She scanned the station's systems, searching for anything that wasn't compromised. The main transmission array was jammed, but maybe. She turned to Elias. "What about the emergency drone?" His eyes widened. "The old relay probe. It's slow, but it's got an encrypted channel. It might work." Lena nodded. "Do it." Elias pulled up the controls, quickly reprogramming the drone's mission. It wasn't designed for combat situations. It was just a backup relay meant for deep space research. But right now, it was their only hope. As the drone powered up, Lena checked the station's external cameras again. The enemy fleet had slowed, hovering in the distance like an ominous storm cloud. They were waiting. Why? A cold realization hit her. "They're studying us." Elias turned to her. "What?" Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "They could have destroyed us already. But they didn't. They're watching." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. It made sense. If this species was advanced enough to coordinate a simultaneous transmission across light years, if they were strategic enough to jam human communications the moment they arrived, then they were also smart enough to analyze their prey before striking. The station trembled. A new alarm sounded. This time, it wasn't coming from their systems. It was external. Lena's heart pounded. "They're scanning us." The walls seemed to vibrate with an invisible force, as if the very structure of Omega-47 was being dissected by something beyond human comprehension. Elias's hands flew over the keyboard. The drone is launching. A small explosion of gas erupted from the station's docking bay as the emergency relay probe shot into the void, aimed toward Earth. It was slow, much slower than the incoming fleet, but if it got past the jamming field. The external cameras flickered again. A new figure appeared among the alien ships. It was larger than the rest, its presence undeniable. Lena and Elias watched in horror as the massive warship rotated slowly toward them. A sudden, blinding pulse of energy flared from its core. Elias's voice cracked. "Lena." But it was too late. A beam of pure energy lanced through the darkness, slamming into Omega-47. The station shook violently, lights flickering, alarms blaring in chaotic bursts. Sparks erupted from the control panels as the entire structure groaned under the force of the impact. Lena was thrown against the console. Elias hit the floor hard. Smoke filled the air. Somewhere deep within the station, an explosion ripped through the lower levels. The whole facility was dying. Lena gasped, struggling to pull herself up. The monitors were failing. The life support system was going offline. The alien fleet wasn't waiting anymore. The attack had begun. The control room of Omega-47 was filled with the scent of burning wires and the distant sound of emergency sirens wailing in protest. Lena Davis coughed, waving away the thick smoke as she struggled to pull herself up from the floor. Her ears were still ringing from the impact. Every screen in front of her flickered with error messages, their once functioning displays now distorted with static. Elias Carter groaned, pushing himself up from where he had landed. Blood dripped from a cut above his eyebrow, but he barely noticed it. His focus was on the sheer chaos unfolding outside. Through the fractured remains of the station's viewport, he saw the alien fleet moving in. Their massive warships advanced with eerie precision, surrounding the burning remains of Omega-47 like predators circling wounded prey. Lena gritted her teeth. "Status report." Elias wiped the blood from his forehead and checked what remained of the functioning systems. Multiple hull breaches. Main power is down. Life support is failing. And the drone? He hesitated, scanning the external feed. The drone made it out. A flicker of hope ignited in Lena's chest. The warning had been sent. But they weren't out of danger yet. A new alert blared from one of the surviving consoles. Lena staggered toward it, wincing as pain shot up her side. She glanced at the display, and her breath caught in her throat. "They're boarding us," she whispered. Elias's eyes widened. What? Multiple incoming vessels, docking onto the lower levels. Lena's fingers trembled as she tightened her grip on the console. They're coming inside. For a brief second, neither of them moved. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't just an attack. The enemy wanted something. Elias pushed himself to his feet, rushing to a nearby weapons locker. He punched in the override code, and the compartment slid open, revealing 2 standard-issue rifles. He grabbed one and tossed the other to Lena. "Whatever they want," he said grimly, "we're not giving it to them." Lena caught the weapon and took a deep breath. They were scientists, not soldiers, but right now they were the only line of defense between the alien invaders and whatever was left of humanity's secrets. A deep clang echoed through the station as something heavy attached itself to the docking bay. Then another, and another. "They're breaching," Elias muttered. Lena swallowed hard. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raised her rifle, aiming at the entrance to the control room. Then, for a few seconds, there was nothing. Silence. An eerie, suffocating silence. And then, boom. The door to the lower deck exploded inward. The lights flickered violently as thick smoke poured into the corridor. Shadows moved within the haze. Lena tightened her grip on the rifle. Elias steadied his aim. The first figure stepped through the smoke. It wasn't human. The creature was tall, covered in armor that looked more organic than mechanical. Its body shimmered under the dim emergency lights, its elongated limbs moving with unnatural grace. Its head tilted slightly, as if observing them with an unsettling curiosity. Then, without warning, it charged. Lena barely had time to react. She pulled the trigger. The rifle roared, sending a burst of plasma straight toward the creature. The energy blast hit, but instead of collapsing, the alien absorbed the impact. The shimmering armor rippled like liquid metal, dispersing the energy harmlessly. Elias fired next, aiming for the head. But the creature moved too fast. It darted forward, crossing the distance in a blink. "Lena, Movi!" Elias shouted. Lena dove to the side just as the creature swung its arm, smashing through a console like it was made of paper. Sparks erupted from the destroyed machinery. Elias barely avoided a second strike. He rolled, grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher and hurling it at the alien. It wasn't a weapon, but it was enough of a distraction. The creature flinched as the metal canister struck its head, giving Lena just enough time to reposition. She aimed at the ceiling and fired. The shot hit a loose panel above, sending a shower of debris crashing down onto the alien. The creature staggered, momentarily pinned under the rubble. "Go! Now!" Lena yelled. Elias didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the emergency hatch, slamming his fist against the override panel. The door hissed open. More shadows appeared in the smoke-filled corridor. More figures. More invaders. "We're outnumbered," Elias gasped. "We have to fall back." Lena didn't argue. She grabbed a nearby data core, one of the station's last uncompromised storage units, then followed Elias into the hatch. As the door sealed shut behind them, the sound of metal bending and screeching filled the air. The aliens weren't just breaking in anymore. They were tearing the station apart. Lena's mind raced. They had to survive. They had to get off Omega-47. Because if they didn't, humanity's war would end before it even began. The emergency escape tunnel was narrow, dimly lit by flickering red lights. Lena's breath came in sharp gasps as she ran, gripping the stolen data core tightly against her chest. Behind her, Elias moved just as fast, his rifle still clutched in his hands. The sound of the station being torn apart echoed through the metal walls. The aliens were coming. Lena didn't stop. They had to reach the hangar. It was their only chance. The station's distress signal had already been sent, but if they didn't get off Omega-47 alive, the warning might not matter. A deep metallic groan rippled through the station, followed by another explosion somewhere above them. The force of it shook the tunnel, and Lena stumbled, barely catching herself against the wall. Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. No time. Keep moving. They reached a junction. 3 possible paths ahead. Lena skidded to a stop, her mind racing. Which way? Elias checked the flickering console nearby, his fingers moving quickly over the damaged screen. Left. No. Wait. They've sealed the main corridor. A heavy thud behind them made both of them turn. The hatch at the end of the tunnel dented inward. Something was hitting it from the other side. Something strong. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. We don't have time. Elias made a snap decision. Through maintenance access. Follow me. They veered right, shoving open a rusted panel and crawling through a narrow service tunnel. The space was tight, barely big enough for one person, but there was no other option. As they scrambled forward, the sound of the hatch behind them giving way sent a cold shiver down Lena's spine. Then, a screech. Not mechanical, not the sound of breaking metal. It was alive. Elias cursed. They're in. Lena didn't dare look back. The tunnel stretched ahead, leading into darkness. She could barely breathe, could barely think. Then, suddenly, open space. They tumbled out into a larger maintenance bay. The air smelled of coolant and burned metal. Flickering emergency lights illuminated the worn-down room. And across from them, a ship. It was small, built for quick extractions, but it was intact. Elias ran forward, slamming his hand onto the access panel. Come on, come on. Lena turned, heart racing. The tunnel behind them was no longer empty. Dark shapes crawled through the opening, their glowing eyes locked onto them. Elias cursed. The ship's ramp was lowering too slowly. Lena didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired. The first shot hit the nearest creature in the chest. It barely flinched. It kept coming. Another shot. This time at its head. The alien staggered. For a split second, she thought it was enough. But then the creature lunged. Lena barely dodged in time. Its claws slashed through empty air, missing her by inches. She hit the floor hard, pain jolting up her arms. Elias grabbed her, yanking her up. We have to go. Now. The ship's ramp was finally down. They sprinted for it. The creatures roared behind them. One launched itself forward, claws outstretched. Lena turned at the last second, hitting the override switch on the ramp's control panel. The ramp snapped shut, just as the alien reached them. Its clawed hand slammed against the metal, inches from Lena's face. She stumbled back, breathing hard, as the ship's engines roared to life. Elias wasted no time. He threw himself into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the controls. Strap in. Lena barely managed to buckle herself in before the ship lurched upward. Through the viewport, she saw the station collapsing. Fires raged. Explosions rocked the structure. The aliens weren't just taking it over. They were destroying it. The ship shuddered as debris slammed against the hull. Elias fought with the controls, weaving through the wreckage. Then, they were clear. Omega-47 shrank behind them, disappearing into the void. Lena exhaled shakily. They had escaped. But the war? The war was just beginning. The stolen ship hurtled through the void, its engines burning at full throttle. Inside the cockpit, Elias gripped the controls, his knuckles white. Lena sat beside him, her breath still uneven, her heart still pounding. The weight of the stolen data core rested heavy in her lap. They had made it out of Omega-47, but they weren't safe yet. A flashing red light on the console made Elias curse under his breath. "They're following us." Lena's stomach tightened. She turned toward the radar screen. 3 ships, fast, sleek, and built for pursuit. The aliens weren't going to let them escape. A crackling voice broke through the ship's damaged comms. The language was unfamiliar, but the meaning was clear. "Surrender or die." Elias didn't hesitate. "Not happening." The ship jerked as he threw it into a sharp dive, skimming just above the debris field left behind by the destroyed station. Chunks of metal and burning wreckage floated through the blackness, a graveyard of ships and bodies. Lena gritted her teeth. "We won't outrun them forever." "No," Elias admitted, "but we don't have to." He slammed a button on the console. A small blinking icon appeared on the screen, a distress beacon. Lena's eyes widened. "You activated the signal." Elias nodded, pulling the ship into a sharp roll as laser fire zipped past them. "I'm betting someone's listening. And if they err..." Before he could finish, the ship shook violently. A direct hit. Warning alarms blared through the cabin. Lena grabbed onto the seat, her pulse hammering. "Shields. Down to 30%. Elias gritted out. "They're not playing around." Another explosion rocked the ship. Sparks flew from the control panels. Lena turned to the weapons system, scanning through their limited options. They had barely any firepower, nothing that could take on 3 fully armed warships. Then she saw it. "Elias," she said, voice steady. "There's a gravity mine in the cargo hold." Elias flicked his gaze toward her. "A what?" "A repurposed mining charge," Lena explained quickly. "It's meant for tearing apart asteroids. But if we drop it at the right time..." Elias didn't need to hear the rest. He was already nodding. "Do it." Lena unbuckled herself and sprinted to the cargo bay. Smoke filled the narrow corridors, the damage worsening with every hit they took. But she didn't stop. The mine was old, rusted, barely held together. But it still worked. She slammed her fist against the release mechanism. The mine dropped into the void. Lena ran back to the cockpit. "Now." Elias pulled the ship up sharply. Behind them, the alien ships followed, their weapons locked. Then, the mine detonated. A wave of pure gravitational force ripped outward. The pursuing ships jerked, caught in the sudden pull. One of them spun out of control, crashing into a floating chunk of debris. Another was torn apart instantly. The third barely managed to escape, but it was too late. A new signal lit up on the radar. Lena's breath caught. Elias smiled grimly. "Told you someone was listening." The void rumbled as a fleet of human warships dropped out of hyperspace. The response to their distress beacon had arrived. The surviving alien ship tried to flee. It never got the chance. A barrage of missiles streaked through the darkness, and in seconds, the enemy was gone. Lena exhaled, her grip loosening on the data core. The war wasn't over, not even close, but for the first time, she felt something close to hope. Elias turned to her, eyes sharp. "We just changed everything." Lena nodded. "Now let's finish it." And with that, they turned toward the fleet, toward the war that had begun with a single signal.